Welcome to this year's official college and high school debate. We are running this year a rather formal student congress, just to kind of shake things up as opposed to our usual debate format. And we have with us several classes represented, both of my college and high school debate classes and Mr. Zippe's politics class, which is also run through the University of Pittsburgh, and my fifth period advanced English class. Thank you very much for being here, all of you. Very much appreciate it. University of Pittsburgh assigns us a topic every single year, and for those of us in my fifth period English class who haven't got this memorized yet, the topic assigned this year is social media good for democracy? The discussion of this topic has taken many different forms. In my class, we began talking about the good and bad things about social media, that it reaches a wider audience, that it reaches a younger audience, that it's quick, even immediate, that it's more inclusive, that it's financially accessible, that it keeps people in touch constantly, and it's fun, and it's funny. We like it. Of course we do. We love social media. And then we were thinking about there are also bad and irritating things about social media, that you find information on it that's mostly false, which can be very troubling in times of big elections or even small elections, that the making of laws and the governing of this body takes all year long, and so social media can have a big impact on lawmaking and laws, and the more we get into it, the more we have to feel our way through it. Things are changing quickly and rapidly, and so what our attention eventually turned to here, at least in my classes, are what the current and developing law has to say about the way in which social media impacts our democracy. And so today's discussion will follow the fairly rigid format followed in competitive debate circles when they do a student congress. Except that before we do our formal student congress debate, in which we will discuss over the course of the next 3 days, two bills that, closely following current events, require us to come to a decision about whether or not social media is good in particular situations within our democracy. Before we do that, we will be taking testimony from people in a sort of a mock senatorial hearing. And so some of the students will, as they do in student congress, play student congressmen, but others will play the role of people who could be impacted by this bill, specifically people who represent either the media or the social media or various other entities that will make themselves known as we go by. They will introduce themselves once called to speak by our PO, Senator Franton, today. Thank you for doing that. That's a good job. I appreciate it. And we'll, like the student senators, give speeches that don't much exceed 3 minutes in length, except for our sponsorship speech, which we've given 4 minutes. Okay. And before we proceed to the student congress from the testimony section, there will be a brief questioning period in which the student congress will be permitted to ask clarification questions and straightforward questions about the opinions of those who gave testimony. All of you should be taking notes about that. That's where your questions could come into play. However, on the questions, I do want there to be the following 3 rules that get followed. Questions should be only for purposes of clarification. I want people to feel fairly comfortable up here, and if they haven't done, the research to answer your very specific question, then they will just say they don't know and we'll have to move on. That's fine. I think what's great about these debates is how much research people do. And I think that people who are speaking will mostly have the answer. But I'm not up here, I'm hoping not to see a lot of divisiveness or opposition on purpose. I think we're striving ultimately for consensus, and failing consensus, God help us and God forbid, we will reach a respectful disagreement at the end. So, especially the people giving testimony speakers, if you don't know the answer, don't worry about it. Just do the best that you can answering those questions. And if you are in one of my other classes, during the questioning session, I expect there to be questions, of course, so write notes, go along. The last point about that, though, would be no prefacing. Prefacing is when you make a statement and pretend it's a question. We're not going to do that. Please don't give your opinion. Just ask questions that are for purposes of clarification only during that session. So if we have time for questioning, which Tanner will run after the student Congress speeches, though there's not supposed to be prefacing, he'll be making that call as best he can as we go along. Are there any questions? I did speak to you before we began, so today's will be a little bit short. We'll do a little bit less of this introductory piece for tomorrow. But genuinely, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them now. Okay? Yeah?
How much time for questioning should I give after somebody speaks? A bill to require electronic communication services to report acts of terrorism and terroristic threats. Be it enacted by the Student Congress here assembled that any person who provides an electronic communication service to the public through a means of interstate or foreign commerce must report any knowledge of any terrorist activity and shall do so as soon as is reasonably possible to the appropriate authorities. The term electronic communication service may be defined by the 18th U.S. Code as any wire, radio, electromagnetic, photo-optical, or photoelectronic facilities for the transmission of wire or electronic communications and any computer facilities or related electronic equipment for the electronic storage of such communications. The knowledge that must be reported includes any facts or circumstances from which there is an apparent violation of Section 842P, Title 18 of the United States Code. Protection of privacy. Nothing in this legislation may be construed to require the provider of an electronic communication service or remote computing service to 1. Monitor any user, subscriber, or customer to that provider, or 2. Monitor the content produced by any specific person described in Article 1. And the Attorney General shall determine the appropriate authorities referred to in Article 1. And this piece of legislation shall be implemented on the last day of March 2017. All other laws in conflict with this new policy shall hereby be declared null and void. Our first speaker is Senator Peabody.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm sure you're all very familiar with the San Bernardino attacks in California in 2015. But for those who aren't familiar, I'd like to just explain something. The FBI recovered the cell phone of the suspect shortly after the shooting. However, they could not recover the information on the cell phone due to security reasons. Therefore, the FBI went to Apple, due to the phone being an iPhone 5C, went to Apple, the corporate, to ask for a waiver of the release of the privacy information. Apple denied the FBI the waiver to release the privacy to protect the terroristic threats made from the terrorist. The suspect whose phone was recovered reportedly posted her allegiance to ISIS on her Facebook page before the attack. Facebook deleted the post per Facebook policy. But social media companies need to do more than just take down these sites or posts. They need to report them. We're in a new age where terrorist groups like ISIL are using social media to reinvent how they recruit and plot attacks. That information can be the key to identifying and stopping terrorist recruitment or a terrorist attack, but we need the help from technology companies. The FBI could not get the help from the Apple Corporation, so they had to find an outside source to open this phone, and the FBI paid this outside source $1.3 million to open the information to the cell phone. On one instance of a terroristic threat, the FBI paid $1.3 million. One instance. According to a study by the Brookings Institute, there are about 46,000 Twitter accounts associated with the Islamic State just between October and November of 2014. Twitter suspended thousands of these accounts, but not one of them were reported to a government agency. A minimum of 1,000 ISIS-supporting accounts were suspended by Twitter, but the accounts that tweeted most often and had the most followers were likely to not be suspended at all. Based on a study by the Brookings Institute, they suggest that the social media companies and the government agencies work together to devise appropriate responses to extremism on social media. Approaches to the problem of extremist use of social media are most likely to succeed when they are mainstreamed into wider dialogues among the broad range of community, private, and public stakeholders. This bill, when I first started writing this bill, I considered everything that could be countered in this bill and considered everything that this was going to affect. And the first thing that came to mind was the companies. The most misleading statement that I heard from all was that the companies would have to hire more people, they would have to pay more money, someone would have to screen them. But this just simply isn't fact. This bill doesn't require companies to take any additional actions to discover terrorist activity. It merely requires them to report such activity to law enforcement when they come across it. Social media companies are already screening for terrorist threats. Congress needs to do everything that we can to help intelligence and law enforcement agencies identify and prevent terrorist attacks, and this bill is a step in the right direction. Now, the next thing that I thought about to be countered on this bill was obviously free speech is going to be brought up. So I'd like to introduce a case to you. The Supreme Court held this case called the Holder versus Humanitarian Law Project, and in this case they ruled that anyone who has aided a terrorist organization, free speech rights were not protected. In fact, free speech rights are not protected to anyone who, or not applied to anyone who harms others in any way, such as creating or distributing child pornography. So why are we protecting the free speech rights of terrorists? Terrorists in our country give up those free speech rights when they threaten America and they threaten anyone in our country. It's mind-boggling to think that those who behead and burn others' lives are able to use our own companies against us to further their cause. But that's exactly what's occurring. If social media is being used to help radicalize thousands of people and raise millions of dollars for terrorist groups, the question arises, why is no one shutting them down? Because American companies certainly aren't. Apple would not give any security over to the FBI, and the government is just letting it happen. American newspapers would have never allowed the Nazis to place an ad for recruitment during World War II. Designated foreign terrorist organizations should not be allowed to use private American companies to reach billions of people with their violent propaganda, and it's all in just an instant. That's why I stand firmly in the affirmation, and I encourage you all to do so. Thank you, and I yield my time to questioning.
All questioners, please rise. Senator Summerlin.
Order when you spoke. What? Are we doing order by when you spoke?
No,
Okay. All right. So I'd like to ask how your anecdote is relevant, because in the bill it says that no company shall have to collect or store information about terrorism. So if Apple didn't have to collect or store this information, how are they going to be forced to hand it over?
Because per policy of Apple, in any social media company, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, their own policies state that any terrorist activity that they have deleted is stored. So they're already doing so themselves. They just don't have to, my bill is just stating that they don't have to store anything extra. It's just what they're already doing in their own policy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Kelly.
What exactly defines a terroristic post or page to you, and who would decide what is terroristic?
Again, the companies have their own policy to decide what is terroristic threats, and they're already screening for these terroristic threats by their own policy, so whatever the company believes by their policy. The companies are already shutting these down. They're erasing the messages, erasing the posts, deleting the sites. They're just not reporting them. And so the goal of my bill is to get them to report them to the agency so they can be further investigated. Thank you.
Senator Musser.
Yeah, you said that when terrorists in America, they lose their rights to privacy on social media and stuff. How is that possible when, I'm not going to say most, but a good amount of terrorists are homebred Americans that live here forever? How do you determine when they lose their rights?
I believe that people lose their rights, like the Supreme Court case that I said. When they are aiding a terrorist organization, they're giving up their free speech. Their free speech rights are not protected.
Senator Wilt.
Just clarification, you said that this bill will help stop things like
it's the San Bernardino shootings and other shootings that have happened throughout the country.
Correct.
Senator Keechuk, or Ms. Keechuk.
You said that Apple would not unlock the iPhone to protect the terrorists. Do you believe that they were protecting the terrorists or protecting their privacy policies as they hold?
Yeah, I believe that they were protecting their privacy policies that they hold, but in turn protecting the terrorists because the terrorist was a customer of their company.
Mr. Zipek.
Is it possible that there is a negative externality in all this? As you say, there are already policies in place by companies to take down websites and such. But my fear is, the question is there the possibility that Apple and other companies might change their policies as a direct result of this, so that they, because what's to prevent them from changing their policy, so that they don't actively, on their own as they have, go after these terrorists or whoever? Is there anything in the bill that would prevent them from changing their policies, which might be an indirect externality result of this?
No, there's not. I believe that there shouldn't be anything in the bill to protect them from changing their policy, because then the government is controlling the media, and the media has their own free rights of controlling how their policy is. And I do believe that is a possibility that the policies could be changed, and that's a great question. Thank you.
In the interest of time, you may be seated.
Thank you.
Senator Kelly. Speaking in mitigation.
Years. For 20 years, the internet has been an extremely transformative role in promoting democratic values and free speech worldwide. However, this bill seeks to alter that freedom into becoming whatever the government deems acceptable for others to post, view, and to do. This is not only constitutional, it is also highly unjust to the people of our country. To start off, allow me to address the vagueness of this bill. One of the many issues this bill presents is that it has the potential to unintentionally target otherwise innocent people who would become subject to government surveillance. The amount of terror attacks in these recent years have struck paranoia into the hearts of many, and should companies such as Twitter, Facebook, etc. be forced to report any content that seems terroristic, there is a major possibility that over-reporting would occur, and the line between government and social media would become blurred. Might I add, social media CEOs, company workers, etc. are not trained to spot terroristic activities before they occur, the same way that FBI agents are. For example, should an innocent person be the author of a post that a Twitter employee suspects and reports, unjust or just, that person would now be under the watchful eye of the government at all times, and anyone who may have liked, shared, or linked others to that post is now also at risk, as concluded by free speech specialist Emma Lonslow. Not only could this cause a massive loss of users within social media platforms, causing companies like Twitter and Facebook lots of grief, but there would no longer be any safeguards for people getting reported or accused, whether or not the accusations have any basis. Although the loss of companies' businesses is also a very important point to touch upon. If people saw that Twitter and Facebook accounts were getting reported left and right, then they would be less inclined to download it, which would in turn force them to possibly shut down completely. Social media companies do their best to remove anything that spreads hateful or violent content, but as Monica Bicker of Facebook said, millions of pieces of content are received every day, making the idea of proactive monitoring and viewing before posting and uploading is completely impossible. The government should not have the right to pressure social media companies into reporting and removing people from their sites faster than they are already capable of, because that, added with the paranoia caused by recent attacks, leads to easy misunderstandings and ends up causing both innocent people and companies lots of pain. This also applies to companies like Apple, who, should they be required to make a backdoor way for the government to access a terrorist phone, would be going against their safety guarantee in their terms of agreement and privacy policy licensing. It could easily open the way for illegal hackers and, ironically, terrorists to access their software more easily. Things like this could truly destroy the company and our peace of mind as a country. And of course, this all comes back to the First Amendment. The First Amendment clearly states that Congress shall make no law prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. Although it is true that the government can put into place something known as a time, place, and manner restriction, the restrictions involved with this bill are too vast, and it would not be narrowly tailored enough, and it applies to too many platforms and people to be considered truly fair. The bill not only applies to multiple platforms of both software and social media, but the users of these products. The bill would be in effect all hours of the day and would apply to everyone and anyone who does something which the social media users and the company workers consider remotely suspicious. Director of MIT Media Lab, Joichi Ito, once said, "If we destroy human rights and rule of law in response to terrorism, then the terrorists have won." This bill shows a lack of specificity, would cause harm to both companies and innocent people, and violates the First Amendment of the Constitution. Because of these reasons, Senators, I urge you to vote in the negation of this bill, and I yield my remaining time for questioning.
That was a speech of 4 minutes and 11 seconds. All questioners, please rise. Ms. Stevenson?
How is the government able to enforce its independent companies and
That is a really important question that I noticed this bill doesn't quite address. There is nothing in this bill about the possible consequences that may or may not occur if, for example, Facebook did not remove a dangerous and potentially terroristic page in time before or after a terror attack occurred, which is just another unspecified mistake this bill has made.
Senator Sherman.
You said in this bill that it was hurting free speech and it was hurting our First Amendment. Do you believe that private companies monitoring and policing their own service and removing people that they deem as terrorists, do you believe that that hurts our constitutional rights, a private company acting on their own will?
I believe a private company monitoring speech itself doesn't necessarily end up being constitutional. I do believe giving them the right to report and remove whatever they feel like is unconstitutional.
Seeing as there's no more questioners, you may be seated. Next, we have Senator Holder.
The only thing worse than losing American lives from acts of terrorism is knowing that these acts could have been entirely prevented. Because it is right, Senators, I urge you to vote in the affirmation of the bill on terrorism reporting. I am here to speak to pass this bill because there are already cases of terrorists taking to social media to express their views, with consequences on the American people being seen from lack of security and monitoring online. For example, the Orlando shooting that took place in 2016 at the nightclub and social media accounts that are currently being used by terrorist groups are examples of media being used to recruit and express extremist views. According to MSN, the gunman that shot up the nightclub in Orlando checked social media for news of his attack shortly after it happened. And after he was shot by police, 5 different Facebook accounts were found that are believed to have been associated with him, containing posts such as, the real Muslims will never accept the filthy ways of the West, end quote, along with other extremist statements that in hindsight are very alarming. The final post made on Omar Mateen's Facebook read, quote, "In the next few days, you will see attacks from the Islamic State in the USA," end quote. The FBI believes that Mateen became an Islamic extremist after watching videos and seeing propaganda that influenced him to terrorize the nightclub. Since there is no standard set for social media companies to report flagged words or terms to any authority, there was no way for the attack to be prevented. Thanks to search warrants, more information was found, but it was already too late after the shooting had already happened. Mateen also searched for information on the San Bernardino shooters and speeches about jihad extremism before shooting up the nightclub. If there was a required flagging and reporting system in place, the shooter could have been investigated, tried, and sentenced before the shooting ever even occurred. Also, according to Fox News, there still are known Al-Qaeda Twitter accounts as recently as 2015, and social media is still being used to recruit terrorists from all over the world. Although media sites are taking measures to remove the propaganda, pages keep popping up regardless of how many times they are taken down. According to CNN, there is supposed to be a strategy to prevent, quote, online radicalization, end quote, from the White House. But that is yet to be seen, and it is time to come up with a set rule on reporting and dealing with online terrorism. There needs to be a clearly set of articulated goals and justice for those who use social media to further their terrorist agenda. I yield the rest of my time to questions.
All questions, please rise. Senator Kelly.
Just to clarify, how exactly do you expect social media companies to spot what could be considered or could not be considered a terroristic post or page if billions of other pages are being used at the same time?
As stated by Senator Peabody, they already have their own flagging system in place, so they remove the pages, and it's not up to the government or anybody. It's already the policies that they have in place. Please refer to Ms. Peabody for any more questions about that.
Mr. Hopkins.
Aren't real terrorists coming into the United States and recruiting in person? Would this act help the issue of recruiting online?
Well, according to the FBI's website, there is a nationwide SAR initiative, which stands for Suspicious Activity Reporting. It's an effort to help prevent terrorism and criminal activity that allows the FBI to gather information on the sharing of potentially dangerous information. This initiative should be applied everywhere else, and even if there are a few attacks coming from the internet, stopping any attack that saves a life should definitely be a top priority. Also, according to PBS, there are these things called lone wolf attacks, which is where there's one person sitting on his computer at home looking up all this information about extreme groups and developing his own ideas that doesn't have any contact with any groups at all besides on the internet. So the internet allows for this extremism to develop, and I believe that it should be stopped or filtered.
Thank you. Ms. Morrell.
How will reporting the flagged information actually make a difference? There's plenty of terrorist activity that happens from sources other than social media.
Yes, there are terrorist organizations that recruit by other means than social media, but now all these social media platforms act as a megaphone for anyone sitting at his computer in any foreign country, in any side of the U.S. And I believe that it is the right of the American people and the duty of the private companies to protect the lives of those they are serving.
Senator Will.
So you believe that this bill will do things to stop the many terrorist attacks that you mentioned in your speech?
I believe that the security measures that we already have in place through organizations such as the FBI will be able to take care of the suspicious activity that is taking place.
Thank you. Senator Thomas.
Do you believe that if there was reasonable suspicion that a person was a terrorist or was going to do a terrorist act, that they could get a search warrant to get this information instead of just making and forcing people to report it?
Permission to clarify, to ask a returning question?
Yeah.
Do you mean the stuff that already happens every single day?
No, I mean if you have a reasonable suspicion you need reasonable suspicion to get a search warrant to get information about somebody for a crime. And so do you think the government should have to get a search warrant for that, or do you think that they can just force people to report that?
After a certain point, the rights of free speech are forfeited, as Ms. Peabody also said. And after that point, as determined already by the policies in place, that is when search warrants would no longer be necessary.
Any interest? Mr. Zipai.
Do you feel that this bill already explains or details, as you said you hope you see, the standardization and the specificity, or that it's lacking that? And would you vote to affirm or negate? I was unclear on that.
Vote to affirm.
Do you feel that this bill is sufficiently providing standards to follow?
Oh, yes, of course.
Thanks.
In the interest of time, we need to move on. You may be seated.